Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. On the agenda first, we'll take a look at House Bill 692. The chair calls Representative Black to come to the podium and explain his bill.
Good evening, and it's good to be with you all, and I appreciate Chairman calling this bill. This, in the classic words, is a little bill, doesn't do a whole lot. Has to do with banishing. As you all are aware, that sometimes a judge will banish a person to a particular area. The state constitution prohibits a person from being banished from the entire state of Georgia. However, the judges have taken the position that as long as they leave one county, that they haven't banished him from the entire state of Georgia. Banishing is a very effective tool, but the judges that used quite often to get a person away from someone that they need to be away from. And I have talked with a number of judges and realized that this is a very effective tool that we need to protect. The problem that I've run into is that there has been a history of some judges in certain areas that will banish someone to an area they know that that person is not going to go to. I represent Echols County, and for some time, some of the judges, particularly in DeKalb County, have banished folks to Echols County. Some of the judges in South Georgia have banished folks to Dade County, right up on the north part of the state, right on the line. Now, a person that lives in DeKalb County is not going to come to Echols County. So they end up moving out of the state. The person in South Georgia is not going to go live up in them mountains in North Georgia. They'll go to Florida or go over into Alabama someplace. And to my knowledge, no one that has been banished to Dade County or no one that has been banished to Echols County has actually moved there. The problem arises when the newspaper or the news meter pick up the fact that these judges have been banishing all of these convicted criminals to this particular area. And it becomes a real problem with the people that live in these small counties. They get quite upset about it. Some judges sending all their criminals down there. The bill that I've drawn up says that when the judges banish someone, they must leave at least one entire judicial circuit. And I chose that in talking with some of the judges that I talked to because the judicial circuits, particularly in the rural areas, don't have, the people that live there don't have the name associated with it. They can still banish people to the Alapahaw circuit down there that includes Echols County. And the rest of the counties in that circuit, about like Echols County, people from these other areas are not going to move down into the Alapahaw circuit. And I'm drawing a blank right now. I spoke with Representative Scott, who represents Dade County, and that circuit up there is named after some river or something, I think. But at any rate, judges in South Georgia can still banish someone up there. He's not going to go there. He's going to go down into Florida, or he's going to go someplace else. And this saves the embarrassment of the people that live in these areas from having to read in the paper about all these criminals being banished to their county. The other phrase that I thrown in there, I put that in there myself, it says that if the judge requires some services, that they've got to be available in that area. I put that in. I felt like it was needed to keep the thing constitutionally sound, keep it from being thrown out, because I did hear of one case where a person was banished to Echols County, and it was part of his banishment that he get psychiatric treatment. There ain't no psychiatric treatment available for anybody in Echols County. But at any rate, that's all the bill does. At this time, I'll entertain any questions anyone might have.
Chair would ask that if you have questions, if you push your gray button, and we'll take them in order. Any questions? I think it's Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Black, I certainly understand what you're saying, being from a relatively small area. But I didn't know Eccles County was so popular. I'm wondering if we got up a little money and got you a psychiatric person down there, would you be more amenable?
You'd have to send him some business down there to support him. We don't have many people in Eccles County that need any psychiatric care.
Any other questions? Representative Cox?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Black, in your mind, amending this code would not prevent a judge from banishing an individual from a certain area or
Right,
circuit. Is that correct?
that's right.
Thank you, Representative Cox. Representative Reese?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Black, Dade County is in the Lookout Mountain Judicial Circuit, named after a mountain rather than a river. I was aware that judges use this for specific reasons, but I was more familiar with the judge banishing from an area rather than to
Right.
a specific area. How often does this happen that they send someone to a specific?
This to my surprise, banishing from an area like what you're talking about is quite common. Quite often the judge will banish him from that circuit. I had one former judge tell me that he always banished him from the circuit because he didn't want to have to deal with him more, and he also banished him from his home county. He didn't live in his county that he lived in, wasn't in his circuit, so he didn't want them as neighbors, so he'd banish him from his county plus the circuit that he worked in. That is a very common. What I'm talking about where they are banished from the entire state of Georgia except for one particular county. It's not an everyday occurrence. But it has
been
been.
a problem to you, and
Yes, it has been enough that it has attracted some media attention, and there has been a situation that's twice been stories written up in the AJC about some of the judges in DeKalb County banishing folks to Eccles County, and that did cause consternation with the people down there.
Thank you, Representative Reese. Representative Green?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Since I am a co-sponsor of this bill, I understand the problem of the stigma being attached to the county, and what Representative Black is trying to do is just offset it by just stating a judicial circuit instead of the county there. And so at the proper time, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask the committee to entertain a motion of a do pass.
Got a couple more questions before we can move to that. Motion, Representative Hurd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask the question, is there a specific instance that's brought this about, or is it just the publicity and the stigma that's came from it?
Publicity, because as I said, I do not know of a case where a probationer has actually moved into one of these counties like this. The cases that I'm aware of, that probationer ended up moving out of the state, and which was the intent of the judge whenever he entered that condition of probation, was want to get rid of them, get them out of the state. This would still allow judges to take this extreme, which, I mean, banishing of a person from the state of Georgia is a pretty extreme sentence to say, we won't get rid of you, we want you slapped out the state of Georgia. This will allow them to continue to do that. But it wouldn't put the stigma on these areas like what mentioned a particular county does, because these small counties are in judicial circuits from which that they don't have the attachment to their judicial circuit that they do to the county that they live in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hurd. Looks like there's no more questions for you, Representative Black, but I would like to ask Ms. Nesbitt if she'd come and give us what the Superior Court's opinions are of the bill, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Superior Court judges have not taken an official position on this bill, but I did send out an inquiry to find out if they had problems with the bill. And because of the language, the banish to a particular county, they didn't really see a problem with it because they still have that alternative of banishment from the county. So none of them really had any strong feeling about that either way.
Thank you, Ms. Nesbitt. Any questions?
Thanks.
Representative Green for motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I would move that House Bill 692 be voted on and given approval.
Do I hear a second? Second. All in favor by raising your hand, Jay. Any opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. House Bill, that's 692, do pass, reported favorably. All right, thank you. We'll move on now to the department. I've asked Assistant Commissioner Brian Owens to come and give the committee an update on the infamous term realignment. I know a number of the members of the committee has either heard rumors or someone in their districts have called them with concerns, and I thought it would be fitting for the Assistant Commissioner to come and update us. And I'm sure you've got plenty of questions for him. And this time I'll turn the microphone over to Assistant Commissioner Brian Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And I am glad to be here today to talk about realignment in the field. But before I talk about realignment in the field, I'd like to take the opportunity to also tell you about realignment in Atlanta, in our headquarters, because I think that tells part of the story too. As we all learned 2 days ago, the Department of Corrections will be moving about 50 miles south, and the Vice Chairman will be my new personal legislator when I move my family there to Tift College in Forsyth, and we're excited about that. But if you read the press release and some of the news media accounts, it states there that the way that we'll finance this move is through reduced personal services. And I want to make sure that my committee understands what we're talking about there. We have in the central office in Atlanta, we have operations in the Twin Towers, but we also have operations, IT operations on Park Place about 2 blocks away, and significant operations at the GEMA complex with our engineering construction services. So we're actually at 3 different locations in metropolitan Atlanta. Now, over the years, the General Assembly at those 3 locations has authorized us to have 468 positions over the years. Now, starting in March of this year, we put a hard hiring freeze on any positions being hired in metropolitan Atlanta for any position. In fact, the commissioner ordered that any positions that are filled have to be filled through me. So I personally take a look at every position, and if it's not an absolutely critical position in 2006 and 2005, we're just not going to fill that position. So in March of this past year, we were standing at a vacancy rate on those 468 positions of about 10%. Today we're at 18%. We've got 82 positions that are not filled in metropolitan Atlanta, and that is by design. And over the years, as your prison system has grown, your central office has grown too. Now, we've not been very good stewards, I will admit, of employing good business practices in the Department of Corrections. I think we're getting better in applying those business practices. We've not taken advantage of IT opportunities in our processes. So over the past year and a half, and I believe I spoke about this, Mr. Chairman, last year, we've taken the opportunity to analyze some of our processes. The way we receive court documents, the way we process them, the way we move inmates and the paper processes. Our paper-intensive hiring processes that requires about 85 individual pieces of paper in order to hire a correctional officer. And by the time you go through that process, the correctional officer's found another job elsewhere. So by re-engineering these processes and continue to re-engineer these processes, we're not going to be moving 468 positions to Tift College in Forsyth. We believe that number is going to be significantly less. So I want to make sure the committee understands that we're downsizing central office first and foremost. Now, having made that clear, let me talk to you about what we're doing in the field. You recall back in 2004, 2003, we as a state experienced pretty difficult budget times. We brought in a new commissioner, Major General from the military, who started molding us into a military organizational chain of command structure. Y'all may recall that in 2004 we eliminated regional manager positions. That had grown to 47 positions in the regional manager positions. Excuse me. That enabled us to offer the governor and the General Assembly a $2.3 million budget cut in our base budget. The governor did take that cut. You all recommended it, so we were able to eliminate $2.3 million. Now, those people didn't necessarily go away. They were moved into other positions. Many of them retired, but the bottom line is our base budget was reduced by $2.3 million. So that was the first step in the field. Now, the second step, I'm going to ask you to take a look at our charts, and hopefully we've got a map, Michael, up there first, so that you can take a look at the footprint of your Department of Corrections across the state. You can see that there are very few counties, perhaps Eccles County excluded, the Department of Corrections does not have a presence of some type in the state of Georgia. In fact, we have 120 correctional facilities when you count them all: privates, counties, states, transition, diversion, detention centers across the state of Georgia. We have another 120 probation officers across the state of Georgia, so our field footprint is huge. Over the past year, we've taken the opportunities to go to some of our sister states in the South and take a look at a lot of their business practices. We've taken a look at their IT operations, how their food and farm operations work, their commissaries work, and we've invited them here to learn how most efficiently can we achieve our mission. One of the lessons that we've learned from Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, and the federal system is that if you have facilities that are co-located, very near to each other, the federal system will have the large institution or the host institution serve the support functions for the smaller satellite operations. Let me give you a perfect example. Michael, if I could ask you please to put the next slide up there, or last slide, and talk to you about this. Perhaps the best example of this is right here in metropolitan Atlanta, Mr. Chairman. We have Metro State Prison just across the DeKalb County line. If you take a look at this, you'll see that you have a large female prison, and literally down the hill about 100 yards you have two transition centers. And across the street we have a DJJ facility, and to the right of that institution is where we currently have our fleet located. But the way we're currently organized at Metro State Prison, within yards of each other, we have a warden, we have two superintendents, we have two deputy superintendents, we have 3 or 4 business managers, we have 5 or 6 personnel officers, we have multiple food service personnel, multiple maintenance people. So instead of the large institution providing support to the smaller institutions, we have separate support functions throughout. Our plan, borrowing again off the federal system, is to allow the warden to run the entire operation. Those 2 superintendents will report to the warden. One of the problems that we see when we have facilities closely co-located to each other is that a correctional officer, particularly in metropolitan Georgia, the Savannahs, the Augustas, the Atlantas, and the Macons of the world, we have a difficult time recruiting and retaining correctional officers. So you can probably imagine where I'm going with this. The warden at the big institution, the close security prison, hires a correctional officer. They come on board and they drive right past these 2 little transition centers every day. They're working at a close security prison with inmates serving life sentences, and in this case under death sentence, while their friends down the hill are working with inmates who are transitioning out. So you can imagine after about 6 months where that correctional officer wants to transfer to. As soon as there's an opening in a transition center, he or she goes right down the hill. By realigning these missions, by placing these 2 facilities under the supervision of the warden, in this case he then has the opportunity to manage the staff. If he's short up on the hill at the big institution, he can pull staff out of the smaller facilities and bring them up there. If he needs support on an outside hospital mission, he can manage that function. At the end of the day, through attrition, and Mr. Chairman, this is a key word, nobody's going to lose their job. We have too hard of a time recruiting and retaining our people, but through attrition, through promotions, through ordinary resignations and terminations, with 15,000 employees, every month the Department of Corrections has between 25 and 30 people retire. We have another 100 to 150 resign, again with 15,000, or be terminated for other reasons. So we can manage this through attrition. Statewide, our vacancy rate is 11.3%. We need to hire more people. So I want to stress to you and the other members of the committee who represent the rest of the state that nobody's going to lose their job through any of this realignment process. So I hope we can stop that right now. But I think you could see that by putting the 2 smaller facilities, again through attrition, under the large facility makes good business sense. Having said that, let me tell you where we're going to go in the future. We're only going to go this year to the larger metropolitan areas where facilities exist like this, where they're very closely aligned with each other geographically, and where we have the hardest time recruiting. Quite frankly, when I look around this panel, around this committee, I see people representing some of the rural parts of Georgia, and we don't have the turnover in rural Georgia like we have in metropolitan Atlanta or Savannah. It makes no sense to do this. So we want to take the easy ones first, and eventually we'll get to the more rural areas when we get there. But again, with 120 facilities, I can assure you in rural Georgia, nothing is going to be happening this year. But where we see the Savannahs and the Columbuses and the Augustas and the Macons, this is the approach that we're going to be taking. We believe it's just the best use of taxpayer money. And sir, I'll be glad to take questions.
Okay, I appreciate that, Mr. Commissioner. Let me make sure that everyone heard what you said. You said the word attrition. You also said no one's going to lose their jobs.
Yes, sir.
I've gotten emails and gotten calls that there's some number out there that there may be 450 people will lose jobs because of this. Can you clarify that?
Absolutely, it will not happen.
Okay.
I don't know how much more clear to say it than it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and before I open this up to the questions for the committee, what do you? I can see from your diagram, it makes a lot of sense when you've gotten within. I mean, you actually can see those centers from one center to the other. It makes sense, I guess, to develop your chain of command, as you've mentioned. What do you think you might gain when you get into more rural Georgia, where one system may be 35, 40 miles apart?
I don't think if it's 35 or 40 miles apart, we're going to gain anything. I think
Okay.
you've got to have that. There may be small advantages. Perhaps if it's a small facility, we might be able to pull a maintenance person out of there, put them at the big prison, and then just send them down as needed. But certainly we won't be able to realize the kind of efficiencies we can realize in Metropolitan where they're co-led, like what you see today.
Certainly. Appreciate your comments. Got some questions. I'll
Yes, sir.
first yield to Representative Gerald Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to hear you say that the rural areas will be spared, and I want to make sure that I'm saying that correctly at
You
this
are.
point, because we were receiving, and I see Senator Hooks is here, down in Carroll County, we had received a large number, and we were concerned about where the savings were going to be there, and we just felt like, that was going to be impossible with 30 and 40 miles separation there.
That's correct. And let me reiterate that point and just make it clear. We do not have a very difficult time recruiting and retaining in rural Georgia. We have a difficult time in the metropolitan areas. If you're in a rural location and you may be 30 or 40 miles apart, it doesn't make good business sense to apply a host satellite operation. Maybe there's some small efficiencies you can gain, but nothing like what we're talking about today. So thank you for allowing me to clarify that.
And Mr. Chairman, one more.
Yes.
The individuals were concerned, you said that about jobs and that they would be guaranteed those jobs there. But they were not trained for those jobs. They were not trained for correction officers.
Sure.
And so they were concerned about going, and some of these individuals have been at these positions for quite some time. And they were trained and they are very efficient at there.
Absolutely.
And they love working for the Department of Corrections. So I'm glad to hear you say that at this particular time that the rural areas will be spared
Yes, sir.
for at least a year or
Longer.
even more.
Longer, definitely. And again, I can't reiterate enough that with 15,000 employees, I think your Department of Corrections have among the best employees of all state employees in the Department of Corrections, and I can't brag on them enough. I mean, to ask a man or a woman to go into in your district, into a Georgia State prison or a Smith State prison where 2/3 of the inmates are serving life or life without parole, that is a difficult job, and it takes a special breed of person to do that. So I can't brag upon these people enough, and I just thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to clarify.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Green. Representative Hurd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple questions. You might have already given these numbers out and I just missed them. But do you have a turnover rate in the large prisons? What is the number on that?
That's a great question, and let me answer it this way. Statewide, in just the state prisons, not counting the other facilities, it runs up 16 to 18% per year for correctional officers. Now, we have some pockets where traditionally, over the years, we've had difficult recruiting and retaining, and I'll tell you where those are. At Arendelle State Prison in Habersham County has habitually been a problem institution to recruit for because traditionally it's been a closer max security male prison. You may recall that last year we switched that mission now and it's a female prison. So our recruitment and retention is looking great now at Arendelle State Prison. Georgia State Prison. On the end of the line in the Georgia State prison system has typically been tough to recruit and retain individuals. Phillips State Prison, which is located up in Gwinnett County because of its location, very difficult to recruit for. Those are the three biggest, would be Arendelle, up in Habersham, Gwinnett, and then in Tatnall County.
And the second part of that question, on small prisons, what's the turnover rate?
You'd have to go prison by prison on those small ones. The location is so important. Again, I'd have to probably use that 16 to 20% rate.
Well, and where I'm going at with this line of questioning is on in the instance on the chart you have there where you have a large prison immediately adjacent to a smaller prison, and you have instances where people are transferring to the smaller
Yes, sir.
prison. I'm concerned that by bringing it all under one institution, all of a sudden, instead of transferring to the smaller prison, will you lose those people altogether?
I don't believe we will, and there are a couple of things that I think is really going to help us out. We haven't analyzed our entire budget yet, but we saw where the budget recommendation for the governor is pay raises for between 2% and 4% for state employees, targeting those that are below market midpoint. I think the vast majority of our correctional officers and our lower paid people, our craftsmen, our food service workers will qualify for that 4%. I think that'll make a tremendous difference. Starting a correctional officer makes $23,600 a year.
And
It's
that leaves-
hard in that environment.
That will lead me into my last question related to pay scales of the two different types of facilities. Are the pay scales the same, or even though the job demands are considerably different?
They're different. In this particular example, if you work at Metro State Prison, the officers get a 5% security supplement there. So that if they start, it's $23,600 plus the 5%, so there's a 5% supplement. In our close and max security prisons, staff does get a supplement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. Let me ask before I move on to the next question. In your scenario here, the positions which would, I don't know if consolidated is the right word, maybe you can correct me on that, but I'm assuming somebody, when you make a warden or assistant superintendent or change or realign, what positions are we talking about, even in this particular case? What position is going to dissolve?
Over time, dissolving would be...
I would assume this is going to happen this year. You did mention that you're intending to go forward with this year. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's
Go
correct.
ahead
Some
and
of the
explain.
positions that will be dissolved over time would be some of the craftsman's positions. We didn't have dual craftsman's operations. In this particular location, some of the food service positions, because we can serve the food down the hill
Yeah.
rather than preparing and serving at the two smaller institutions. Some of the business functions and personnel functions.
Okay. And I did hear you say the word overtime, and you also said the word attrition at least 4 times now. Do you have a plan as to how you're going to make that work at this point when you start reducing those jobs?
A specific plan? No. What we've done is first off, we trust our wardens to do the right thing. So wherever we're talking about doing this in the areas, it's the wardens first that lays out the plan for us to take a look at. And then we take a more global perspective. If somebody's position is going to be eliminated, perhaps, we may have an accounting position in an accounting example, accounting position in a local probation office that needs to be filled. So we're not going to do this overnight. It's going to be a deliberate process, and we'll move slowly through it.
Thank you. I think our next Representative Reese, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2. First, when do you plan to implement this, where you have the warden supervising an entire complex?
We're actually working right now. The warden is meeting with the superintendents. It just so happens that at one of these centers, we promoted a superintendent out of there. So since we promoted a superintendent out, it gives us an opportunity to begin working on that. So we're actually working today at Metro State Prison.
I'm familiar with Metro and the surrounding facilities there. You said this would be used in other areas that are really metropolitan areas. What are you thinking of, Savannah?
Savannah's a possibility. Again, let me reiterate, no final decision has been made, but Savannah's a possibility. We have a coastal state prison there, plus two transition centers. But again, we'll look at the geographic proximity and make sure it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense geographically, then we wouldn't do it. We would look Macon. We have Central State Prison in Macon, and we have a transition center there. We would take a look at that. In Columbus, we have Rutledge State Prison, exactly the same layout. Down the hill from the big prison is a transition center. We're currently looking at that as we speak, and the warden there has the authority to do that. And off the top of my head, I think those are the only ones we're actively working on.
And then I wonder about the implications for future construction in the years to come. New diversion centers, transition centers, you would try to locate those in
Absolutely.
a larger facility?
When we're talking about diversion and transition centers, as you well know, those have to be placed in at least a relatively large metropolitan area because there have to be jobs there. So if we have a facility in a relatively large metropolitan center, as we add transition or diversion centers, we would certainly try to locate them near where we already have land, or perhaps on the grounds of the land that we have. I know that we have about 8 or 10 acres right next to Augusta State Medical Prison, for example. So if we did anything additionally in Augusta, we would certainly look there first.
Thank you, Representative Reese. Representative Bob Bryant.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Reese really asked part of the question that I was going to ask concerning Savannah. I know of Coastal State location in Savannah, and I know of the transition center's location in Savannah. It's quite a distance between the two.
Right.
So I'm sure that would not be an easy one to manage in the manner that we're speaking. But would you, the two transitional centers that I know of, they're not that far apart.
Right.
So would you consider working those two
That's
together?
absolutely something we take a look at. You know, really what we're trying to get at here, the bottom line is the most efficient way to run our operations to reduce as much as possible support operations and to expand as much as possible, you know, the real heroes out there, those correctional officers and those probation officers that are out there doing the real mission of the department. There's no cookie-cutter approach, sir, that we're taking on this.
Thank you, Representative Bryant. Representative Debbie Buckner.
Thank you. I guess one of the questions that I have that's a real concern of mine is as you are consolidating transitional centers and the prisons, my concern is one going to have more emphasis over the other? Because there are a lot of communities around the state that have been in dire need of transitional centers. What to do with these people that come back, and how do we help them transition into a different and crime-free lifestyle? So my first question is, as you consolidate, what's the real future for transition centers?
Real future is great for transition centers. You may not be aware, but over the past 14 months, led by the governor's office, all affected state agencies who have a stake in offenders reentering, to include Department of Education, Labor, Corrections, Pardons and Parole, GBI, have met monthly to come up with a statewide transition plan, if you will, for the state of Georgia. Over the last 5 years, we've doubled, the Department of Corrections has doubled the number of transition center beds across the state, and we still continue to expand those. I can assure you that nothing's more important to us than making sure every inmate we have who's going to get out gets out just as quickly as he or she can, and we can provide just as many services. So I think the future for transition centers are great in this state.
May I ask you?
Certainly.
I guess what I'm, another concern that I have is that when you look at your job shortages and vacancies, it appears that the correctional officer positions are always the ones that are on the top of the list.
Absolutely.
Do you foresee taking some of the displaced employees and, I don't want to use the word force, but strongly encouraged to take some of those positions when you have these new alignments of transition centers and prisons?
No, that's a great question. I don't think you can, I'm not sure the word you use, coerce or force. I mean, that's just not going to work.
Or whatever.
Whatever the word is.
Encouraged.
No. Quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. We started this year, for the first time ever, working through the channels. We've got what we call an educational program for our correctional officers, and we can encourage our correctional officers, and we make it easy for them. We bring the Department of Technical Adult Education to the prisons in the day room with the shift change. Hope Grant pays for the educational opportunities, not Hope Scholarship, but Hope Grant, 2-year program. And then anybody in the Department of Corrections that attains an associate's degree, we give them a 3% bonus. We fund that ourselves. Anyone that attains a bachelor's degree, we give them a 5% bonus. A correctional officer who has an associate's degree can move over and wear a probation officer's hat and get significant increase in pay. So we're actually encouraging career growth from correctional officers. So if we've got business managers or personnel folks, the same thing applies to them. Education, associate's degree, bachelor's degree. We're trying to make it easier for them to get their education, become nurses, for example, LPNs, that we can hire them at better pay. So we're really trying to grow our staff rather than encourage people, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it's kind of like a transition center. I've got one more question, and this is a little off, but I have had some people contact me that are very much concerned about 2 issues. One is the rural, which has already been mentioned, and these rural communities were promised those jobs, and so for them to have the inmates move to other places or to force those staff to move somewhere else if they were ever closed would really be a disservice to those communities. So I hope that the rural facilities will stay in place. It's not a question, that's just a plea. But my question is, I have heard that there are some efforts to privatize certain services within the prisons, and I know we had discussion about canteens last year, and I'm hearing now discussions about some of the medical services, mental health services being privatized, and that involves a whole other set of employees that are afraid of being displaced. Can you tell us anything about plans by the department?
Sure.
For those kinds of services?
Let me start with medical. We actually really already privatize our medical and mental health services. We have a contract with Georgia Correctional Health Care, which is a subunit of the Medical College of Georgia, and they provide all of our medical care for the inmates and detainees. There's a private company we've had a contract with for years, MHM, that provides the mental health services. Now, just as we're doing throughout the entire organization, we're examining our processes. are we doing the right processes? We believe we're delivering a constitutional level of health care, and we'll continue to do that. But do we have the good processes in order to, again, be more efficient in our operations? And let me give you a specific example. Across the state of Georgia, again, I'll refer you to that footprint, previous footprint. Across the state of Georgia, we have 80 state-operated facilities, and we have mental health programs in 31 of them, even the small facilities. Now, I don't think if we were running a business, we would have 31 mental health programs in 80 facilities. Perhaps we'd have 4 or 5 or 6 and consolidate so that we can get the medical and mental health that we need. We are doing those kind of approaches, but again, it's not a job situation. It's just trying to become more effective in the way that we deliver the mental and medical and dental health services.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Buckner. I'll now call on Representative Clay Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really just a statement, if I may. I heard Mr. Owens, heard you say words and phrases such as streamlining, consolidation, good business sense, maximize efficiency. I got to tell you, this is one of the most refreshing committee meetings I've been in, and one of the kind of buzz phrases that perhaps some of us have used in getting elected to these offices, I know I have, is we got to run government more like a business. And I commend you on your efforts. It seems that you guys are trying to do just that at the department, and I wish you well and support you in your efforts, and pleased to hear your plans, and I'm excited about them and hope you carry them out.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Representative Cox. Representative Al Williams.
Yes, sir. A couple of questions, please. The governor mentioned yesterday that he was adding 4,000 plus beds.
Excuse me, Representative, hold just a second. Representative Dean, would you please take your telephone conversation out? There's a rule in the House that we don't do telephone conversations here. Sorry. Representative Dean. Thank you. Continue, Representative Williams.
The governor announced yesterday some 4,000 additional beds, $43 million in construction. First question is, with the realignment, what kind of plans, or what do you anticipate? I hear a lot from county sheriffs, of course, housing prisoners, and as you do this realignment, are you keeping that in mind? Second part of my question is, I hear quite regularly, very frankly, from your parole, your officers on the field, they complain seriously, and got 2 calls today that there was no mention about raises for them on yesterday, state employees, and many of these people, their average, I think, is somewhat south of the teachers, and they're saying that they're getting less of a raise and hadn't been considered quite a while. We're spending $43 million in construction. What are we going to do about? And that, to me, is one of the great areas of retention for your professionals. What are we doing there?
Let me answer your second question first, if I might. I mentioned earlier that in the governor's recommendation that all state employees would be getting a raise of between 2% and 4%, depending upon where they were in terms of market midpoint. Our probation officers, I'd stack up our probation officers against any probation officers in the nation. You probably know that we require college degrees, bachelor's degrees.
Sure.
Many of them have master's and even doctorate degrees, sure. Law degrees. They're fine folks. They're going to get between a 2% and 4% raise as well, depending upon where they are to their market midpoint salary. So there is an opportunity for them to get the 4% raise, which I believe is what the governor recommended for the teachers, if they're below market midpoint, which the vast majority will be below market midpoint.
Can you help me with one other question?
Certainly, absolutely.
Let me make sure that I understand. I know the market midpoint, but there will be several educators, and well-deserving, that will go up to 7%.
Yes, sir.
Are your probation officers, highly educated folk, are they being capped out at 4%?
Yes, sir.
And that's where primarily I'm hearing. Are we even looking down the road at doing something? Because very honestly, and I understand their point, they deal with some tough guys.
Absolutely.
They do some rough work out there. And they feel like they haven't been heard when it comes time for pay increases. And I know they appreciate the 4%, but I've already gotten some calls and comparing it to the 7%.
Sure.
And I'm just wondering.
All I can say is I concur with you.
Okay.
And as to your first question, you talked about the 4,500 or so beds and what effect will mission realignment have. Again, what I want to emphasize is these are just combining duplicate support functions. We need more men and women in blue in that uniform with those inmates. We need more men and women in the polo shirts and khakis out there protecting us from those probationers, those 135 probationers who live next door to us. So it will have no impact on the additional bed space. But as we become more efficient in our support operations, we hope that we could take and push any kind of savings that we may generate to those people that, again, are actually doing the real hard work out there, the people that wear the badges.
Thank you, Representative Williams. I see no more questions on this issue, so unless you have some closing remarks on realignment, we'll move forward to another question I'd like to ask.
No, sir.
Where are we at on PI?
This committee, as you recall, passed out a committee, and it passed the House and the Senate, and the governor signed a bill last year for the Prison Industry Enhancement Program, which allows us to bring private industry into our state prison system and allow inmates to work. Last year when you passed the bill out, the Attorney General's office was interested in taking a look at that bill, so they took a look at it first and told us what we could and could not do. As a matter of fact, just this month, the Board of Corrections passed out the new board rules for the PI program, and just this month we have sent it up to the Department of Justice for their approval. We anticipate that we'll have it back within the next 90 to 120 days.
I noticed on the rule, I think, that you adopted in your with your board, it was somewhat vague. When do you intend to put the rest of the information as far as how you determine what percentages of income go to where?
When we get that back from the Department of Justice. But again, I believe we put some language in there, Mr. Chairman, that gives you all oversight of that too.
Yeah, that's correct.
So we would certainly be willing to entertain while y'all are in session, having discussions about that and what your guidance is in that matter.
Thank you. Any other questions of the committee? Not. Committee adjourned.
Thank you. Hey, how are you? Hi, Kathy. How do I know you?